So I've got a Retina IIIS camera here, and this has come here for servicing. There's nothing particularly unusual about it. It's quite tidy looking, but it's got one headline fault, and it's this. Film advance sticks out at the end of the stroke. You can release it by hitting the film release button. The shutter fires normally. It even appears to be quite reasonable in terms of time, perhaps a little bit slow, nothing unusual about that. But this problem, what's going on there? Well, most likely what's going on there is that a spring is broken on the bottom of the film release lever, which runs through here. The film release lever's job is to release the film advance at the end of the stroke to allow it to return to the rest position. It also has other attributes. It also means that you can't inch the film advance. It would latch. It latches on various notches all the way through until you get to the end of the stroke, when that lever should pop up and release. So I think there's a fault there somewhere. So I'm going to delve into that, see if we can have a look at that, see if that's where the fault actually is, or if it's something more complex going on. There are other alternatives there. We shall see. So first of all, I want this leatherette patch off the base. Bit of corrosion product on there and probably dried adhesive. This camera is going to be completely stripped down for servicing, so at the moment I'm just looking at the cause of the headline problem, but in practice I'm going to be pulling the camera right down anyway. But if you had an otherwise working camera and you weren't going to completely service it, identifying the single fault and repairing it might be a good solution. Sometimes I even get cameras that fit that description, that they've been serviced in comparatively recent times and all they require is some minor fault repaired. More commonly I get cameras that haven't seen a serviceman for decades, and they need everything. So here I'm just lifting the leatherette off, sliding the scalpel underneath it. Now the scalpel's not really cutting anything, it's just acting like a wedge, and it's just breaking that the adhesion of the glue. You can probably hear that glue sort of crackles as it breaks away. And that's that. They don't come much easier than that when you're going to get leatherettes off cameras. So let's have a look at it. That's a little aluminium disc there, a little metal disc, which just covers this position on the base plate so that the leatherette lies flat. Likewise, there's another one that sits in this position, and there it is on the leatherette. You can see on this base plate there's some white fluffy looking bits here. That's corrosion. That's corrosion on the metal, and that means that moisture has got through the leatherette and caused that corrosion. So let's get this base trim off, and we can look at the film advance mechanism, and in particular the film release, and see where the problem lies. with corrosion on the base plate like this on this camera, it's fairly likely there'll be similar corrosion on the body casting either side of the front the lens. Let's have a look at this. So what first thing I'm considering is this spring here, but it appears to be present and working. So the first answer is not the case. If I turn the film advance, what happens? Gets to the end of the stroke. Now, there's the problem. This lever is not going back up high enough, so it's caught on the end of the ratchet here instead of dropping down to the lower position. It should drop down, and it's incapable of dropping down. It cannot drop down. There's something is holding this lever up. Alright, so we have had a look at the bottom of the camera and we can see what's happening there, and it was nothing particularly helpful for us, except we know the problem doesn't lie at that spot. I'll just pop a couple of screws back in the base plate. Investigating at the top of the camera is a bit trickier because the componentry up there is underneath the exposure meter, and the exposure meter is coupled with a cord, and if you disturb it, very likely the cord will become uncoupled and then the whole camera has to be taken apart to fix it. Why can't this find those screw holes? It's not in the correct position. No, it's not. And I'm just going to pop this around here a bit. Right, that should be the rest position. That was left jammed out there. I hadn't returned that to the rest position. Two screws will hold this for my purposes. That's exactly as it was. That's exactly as it was. Let's get the top of the camera off and have a look. So we know that something appears to be blocking the film advance lever and stopping it from rising to the top of its stroke. Just lift that spring and button off there. Now I'm going to lift the shutter release button off just so as I've got better view of this. And just run that action and see what's happening. Now you might notice there that the film advance is working absolutely normally at the moment. There's no jamming. So what would hold that shutter, that film release button release down? Well, the shutter release certainly would. If there was something jammed in there. Let's put the top back on and have another look. Yeah, it certainly sticks. I wonder, on the top of the film release shaft, there's a return spring and there's a screw. And I wonder whether that screw has backed up on the adjusting threads to the point where it's now sitting so high that when the top is on the camera, the lever is being prevented from rising far enough. Let's see if that appears to be the case. I'm just going to turn that down a couple of turns if I can get to it. This is difficult to access because it's almost under the meter. That's a couple of turns. That would probably make a big difference. Let's check. Top on the camera, holding it down. There you go. Shutter release absolutely normal. So, in this case, the screw on the top of the film release had worked its way back up the shaft. It had come unscrewed. Either that or it had been adjusted badly, but most likely it had just unscrewed itself over time. Perhaps it's loose, it didn't appear loose. I'm going to disconnect that meter, which of course is absolutely fatal if you're only planning to do something minor on the camera. There we go, I've got the meter off. The cord will have happily fallen off its cable, its drums down at the bottom. It'll be a problem. So let's find this part I was talking about. We'll remove the shutter release. We'll remove the film release button. And this thing here, this screw, that's the adjustment on the top of the film release shaft there. And basically what was happening is it was prevented from rising far enough, so the lever jammed out. If it was allowed to rise far enough under its spring, it wouldn't have been a problem. You can get that problem if this film release has been damaged. If this tab is bent downwards, that will bear on that top of that screw head and cause a problem. You can have that problem if this is our shutter release shaft. You can have that problem if the arm on this is damaged in some fashion, but that's pretty rare. More generally, it's because this is incorrectly adjusted. Now that does not appear to be loose on the thread. Oh yes, it does. So that's exactly what it was. The thread there is loose. Over time, this has just worked its way back up, probably bit by bit, over thousands of activations until such stage as it was sitting too high. It also would have meant that the shutter would have released earlier in the stroke of the shutter button than the film release. The film release would have released very early. It had got to the stage where the film release would never have actually set, it would have been effectively released. So there we go. That screw there is what was causing the problem. And it had just worked its way loose. I'm going to strip this camera now. Normally what you do to deal with that, there's two things you can do. The first is at the top of the release shaft, you can crush that in slightly so it bears tighter on the screw. That has to be done fairly carefully, because if you make that a little bit too out of round, the shaft will not move in the casting correctly. So you have to be a bit cautious about that one. And the alternative is that you can reach in with a little daub of paint or lacquer and lock the thread to stop it from unturning. And that's certainly another alternative that works well, and it's probably less fraught with danger. On this particular camera, this Retina IIIS, you are never going to get good access to this until the meter's removed. And if the meter's removed, you're committed to having the front of the camera open anyway to put all the cord back afterwards. So it was never going to be an easy thing to fix on this camera in a permanent fashion. But you could certainly adjust it just by getting your screwdriver down at quite an oblique angle under the edge of the viewfinder meter here. Be going at an angle like this to get to that screw and tightening it up. Now that screw head's quite damaged, I see. I'll probably choose to replace that. That damage effectively makes a rough spot on the top, and that would mean that the adjustment at that point would be hard to get right anyway. In an ideal world, the film release and the shutter fire at the same point. So let's see if we can get that to happen. Something like that. Now that's right on the point of releasing the film release. I can tell because it's sort of latched in position. So I would adjust that normally so it releases that slightly earlier. Let's try that. That's about a quarter of a turn. And why I do that is to make sure that I get reliable release of the film release so that you can wind on to the next shot. If people have got a very gentle touch on the shutter release, as you probably should have, and you squeeze it very gently until the shutter releases, you can sometimes get in a situation where the shutter fires but the film release is not released. And so in order to wind on to the next shot, you've got to press your film release button and wind on. It's very frustrating, of course, because it means you have to do twice as much work. So generally I set these so that the film release releases slightly before the shutter fires. And that works out well. Years ago, if you go back 50 or 60 years, that would not be the situation. People were more focused on not wasting a piece of film. They wouldn't want a situation in which the film release had released before the shutter had fired, because that would allow you to wind on and you'd effectively have a blank frame. If you held the camera up, went to take a photo, started squeezing the shutter release and changed your mind before you'd actually released the shutter, you would possibly have set the film release and allow the camera to be wound onto the next shot, and you would have a puzzling blank frame on your results when you came back. Alright, I've seen that now. That's straightforward. It's a simple thing to fix. This camera is about to be stripped down completely for servicing, so I expect it to be quite straightforward, because apart from that the camera is in quite good condition. No obvious serious problems. The shutter even works. The rangefinder works fine. It's a little bit grimy, but nothing stunning. I'm looking forward to a nice, smooth and easy job. I never seem to get them.